In this video, I'm going to teach you about the plastering process. At this point, every part of your sculpture should be built, including your figures and any props that you'd like to go along with your figures. Once you start plastering, you're no longer going to be able to arrange the arms and legs. So you want to make sure you do that now. And I like to arrange my figures on my base, keeping in mind that my sculpture should be interesting from 360 degrees. So you can turn and move the figures to figure out which arrangement looks best. I kind of like this because I've created a negative space in between these two forms that moves my eye around the piece. And my overall opposite idea, is going to be introvert and extrovert. So I've positioned my figures to tell that story. Once you have the positioning down, then you're ready to move forward with the actual plastering process. I'm going to set these aside. And I'm going to grab a menu from the front of the room. Plastering is something that has multiple steps, so I want everybody to have this with them so you can make sure that you don't miss any important pieces along the way. Step number 1 is to put on a smock. Plaster is one of those materials that will ruin clothing if you happen to spill it on yourself, so protect what you're wearing and put on an apron or smock. Step number 2 is to cut yourself a piece of plaster gauze, which comes on a big roll like this. The plaster cutting process is going to happen at this back round table, and we're calling this the dry table because water never ever comes here. So you certainly shouldn't bring your water container here, but also make sure that your hands are really dry, that you're not washing your hands in between cutting strips, because once water gets on plaster, it activates it immediately and it starts to harden. Once you have an arm's length strip, you're going to cut this up into 1/2 inch long pieces. 50 pieces will cover one figure. You also want to take these bigger strips and cut yourself some small detail pieces. Some of them can be square shaped, some of them can be really narrow for those areas in your sculptures where you have small crevices that you need to get this into. You don't want to have to stop and cut mid-plastering process. So you want to cut yourself a bunch. Make sure you don't skimp on the number of strips that you cut. You can store these in a paper bag. Say you don't have time enough to start the plastering process, then you can just put your name on this bag, put the bag on your shelf, and next class when you come in, you'll be ready to go. You're going to notice that the cutting will generate lots of dust. This dust is really bad for you to breathe in. So definitely I never want you to blow it up into the air. But also, I don't even want you to clean this space. I'm going to come at it with a shop vac at the end of class, so you can just leave it right where it is. Be careful though that you're not rubbing your eyes, or definitely not breathing it in ever. Once you've prepared your strips, then you're ready to move to one of the work tables for the actual process of putting it on the figure. Setting up your workspace, you're going to need a piece of newsprint, your pile of plaster strips, your sculpture, and a plastic container of hot water. So the containers live right here, next to this white bucket. And you want to make sure the water that you get is as hot as you can make it. Hot water will work much better than cold water for this process. Okay, next. Don't drip in your strips. This is very important. I'm going to take the strips of plaster that I've cut, dunk them in water, and then put them on my sculpture. And you can probably see, I hope you can see, that I am going to continually drip water wherever this goes until it lands on my sculpture. If I have my pile of plaster strips in the middle and I'm dripping across that, then every single drop of water is going to activate and then immediately begin to harden. And that is really disruptive to the plastering process. You'll probably find 1 or 2 strips that have hardened. They're super annoying. We don't want that to happen. So to prevent that from happening, we are going to have our water on one side, our strips in the middle, and our sculpture on the other side. So I like to work with my right hand and go in this direction. You're going to pick up a strip, dunk it in the water container. No, that's not right. That's not right. I'm going to have my water in the middle and my strips on this side. So when I pick up a strip, I'm going to dunk it in the water, and when I take it out of the water and go towards my sculpture, I'm not dripping across my pile. You want to plaster the areas that are going to be weakest first. So for my sculpture, the weakest areas are going to be the shoulders and maybe the hips and upper thighs because they have to withstand the weight of my whole sculpture. If I started plastering the hands, as the plaster got heavier, it would pull the arm down unless I supported that shoulder. So start with the shoulders, start with those areas that you would imagine to be weaker. Plaster sticks to itself the best, so anytime you can wrap it all the way around and back onto itself, you will make your life easier. When you first put it on, you'll notice that there are some holes that appear, and we want to rub away those holes as best we can, which will strengthen the plaster and also smooth out any bumps. Keep turning your figure to make sure that you've mushed the plaster into all the crevices. If you don't do that part, then your sculpture is going to lose detail over time. So mush it down, compress it, and then smooth out all the holes. Your entire figure needs to have 2 layers. So once I've done 1 layer, I'm going to go right back over that same area, but maybe in a different direction this time. Crisscrossing your pieces will help add to the strength of your overall sculpture. Making sure that we smooth out those holes once again. Okay. It is helpful if you can start and stop the plastering process within 1 class. So if you don't have time to get the whole thing done, maybe wait until the next class. Hard plaster is difficult to add to. It just works better when you can get it done in 1. So keep that in mind. It's not impossible, but it's helpful. These take about 24 hours to dry completely. They're going to firm up and you'll be able to feel that. But until it's completely dry, if we move around these arms and legs, the plaster is going to crack and then they're going to lose strength. So resist the urge to try to move it. Instead, you're going to bring this right out to the drying table and set it flat down on the table itself. It's not sticky. It's not going to stick to the table at all. So you don't have to worry about putting something underneath it. Once you've plastered your sculpture and you are done working with plaster for the day, the final step is to clean up. So any wet strips or strips that have been dripped on can go in the trash. Your plaster water has that plaster dust at the bottom. If we were to put this down the sink, then that plaster dust is going to harden in the pipes and ruin them. We'd have to rip the whole plumbing system out to fix it. So instead of putting it down the sink, we are going to add it to the white bucket that is in between the sinks. All right, so here's our white bucket. It's square shaped. I'm going to dump that in. And I'm also going to swish around some water in it to wash the plaster out of the bottom and then put the cup back in the stack. I also have plaster on my hands, and I don't want this plaster to go down into the sink either. So I'm going to swish my hands around in the bucket just to get any excess plaster off before washing them in the regular sink. Coming back here, any dry plaster pieces I have left over can go back in the bag, but just be sure you're not grabbing it with wet hands to do that. And the bag can go on the round table, and anybody can use the leftover strips. We like to share. Also, Your newsprint can get folded up so we don't spread the dust everywhere. Keep the dust trapped inside. That goes in the trash. And then finally, we want to go over our table with a wet sponge, then dry paper towel to try to get up any dust that has spread out beyond our paper. That's the plastering process in a nutshell. Let me know if you have questions, and good luck.